Welcome to The Forum, your modern-day coffee house, where ideas can be birthed, exchanged, and wrestled with. We celebrate questions, conversation, and reason as powerful tools to enlighten hearts and transform minds, shaping a new generation of thinkers, innovators, and pioneers. We're glad you're here, so pull up a chair and let's begin.
Good morning, everyone. It's nice to see you all. So just before we start, last year I did a talk on the theological evolution of the ideas surrounding the death and resurrection of Jesus, and ultimately how that led us to things like the Trinity and those ideas that now are quite prominent within the Christian movement. And I listened back to it actually the other week as I was thinking of what I was going to speak about today. And I'd like to apologize. I crammed a lot of content in there, and it should have probably been done over 2 sessions. Even I needed to lie down after that one. So I apologize if it caused an aneurysm or anything. Nevertheless, these things are really important to discuss. But today, I'd like to do a similar thing, but I'd like to do the same thing with the topic of hell. Such a bright and breezy topic to be looking at on a Sunday morning, eh? So I'm going to start with this now. I'm going to use this thing again, see if it works. Now, how the hell, see what I did there, did we go from this to this? Valid question, eh? Now, when we think of hell, many of us have this depiction in our minds. It's the idea of fire, brimstone, pain, torture, a red man with horns. And even non-religious people would generally hold this view when you use the word hell, so it's not just within the religious movements. But what if the hell that we know today was not always the hell that people believed in? What if the notion of hell is not just a theological concept that changed over time, but also a cultural and psychological response that has evolved to suit particular agendas? Now, I've titled my talk today, What the Hell? Now, when I was thinking about delivering this, I was like, it would be really, really cool if every time I said something that you hadn't heard before and was a new idea, you all shouted, "What the hell?" But then I thought it might just get a bit messy and a bit disruptive, so maybe we won't do that. However, I would like you to think about your own perceptions of hell as I speak today. Do you still believe it is a literal place? Is it metaphorical? Is it a place for the wicked? I also thought I should have walked on to "No one mourns the wicked." Does it resonate with our sense of justice? Or is it unjust? You could ask, why do we care about talking about these topics? Now, many authors, particularly over the last 20 years, have challenged the widely held beliefs surrounding the concepts of hell and really created a shake-up within the religious institutions. Now, when I say the last 20 years, these topics have been discussed for centuries, but more particularly within the last 20 years, as we moved more into what we would consider a more liberal society, some of these notions start to be challenged in greater depth. Some of you will know the author, Rob Bell, as a perfect example of this in the reaction scene in his book, Love Wins. Now, I personally don't believe Rob Bell took it far enough, but nevertheless, I do think that what he started within the religious community was really, really important. Now, if we really care about the pursuit of truth, and I say this often, are we willing to delve into some of the ideas that have fundamentally shaped not only our own lives, but religious institutions across the West? So, we're going to start with a little bit of history, if that's all right. So, Bart Ehrman is a prominent New Testament scholar. You can find a lot of his discussions and podcasts. They're very, very interesting and very deep in the things that he delves into. Now, he's pointed out that the idea of hell as a place of eternal torment is not as ancient as many think. In fact, the Hebrew Bible, also known as the Old Testament, does not depict hell in the way we understand it today. Instead, it mentions a place called Sheol, which I showed at the beginning, which is kind of this shadowy, neutral realm where everyone goes to after you die, regardless of your moral behavior. Now, this may come as a shock, but Jesus himself, as a first century Jew, didn't actually believe that your soul went somewhere after you died. What the hell? Thank you. That was a good one. Neither bliss in paradise or the abyss below. The Jews believed the body and the soul was an integrated unit, and they certainly didn't believe that there was punishment for the souls after death. Now, what Jesus did believe was similar to other apocalyptic Jews of the time, in that there would be life after death, and this is where it gets really interesting, but this life would come when God once again breathed his life into the physical body when he ushered in his new kingdom here on earth. Now, when we talk about breathing in his life, you've all read the Genesis story of the idea that we were dust and the breath was breathed into the dirt and then it became a living being. That's in effect what the Jewish people believed about life. If you didn't have that breath, you were no longer living. At the end of the age, God was essentially going to make everything right that was wrong. Those who were on the side of God would be rewarded forever, but those who corrupted the kingdom would be subject to a second death by fire, but not eternally tortured or tormented. This was basically the physical body dying a second time. What the hell? So how then did this continue to develop into what we know as hell today? Well, we have the emergence of these different words popping up in the New Testament. The concept of hell in Christian tradition develops primarily with this word, Gehenna. Now, Gehenna, and I know that we learned about this years back, was a literal valley outside of Jerusalem. It was associated with death, destruction, and metaphorical judgment, but not a fiery underworld. Now, I find it scary that that literal place, which was being referred to, which was then used as the word hell, ended up being basically the idea that we have today, this place here. It's quite incredible, really. You see, thank you, Georgia. You see, you take the word out of context and you fundamentally change what it means. For first century Jews, to be told that if you don't buck up your ideas, you won't get a proper burial and you will be thrown into a literal pit was a pretty grim idea. Jesus, in effect, was preparing people for the literal kingdom that would exist for the righteous here on earth. And as I have just discussed before, this is largely why he ended up on a cross, because anyone suggesting a new kingdom would be ushered in didn't sit well with the Romans who were currently ruling. It's kind of like Keir Starmer's backbenchers threatening to usher in the Reform Party. What the hell? That's definitely a what the hell. Jesus never once talked about hell in the way that the church believes it today. So how did we get this theological evolution? Well, By the end of the first century, most Christian converts came from pagan rather than the Jewish community. As inhabitants of the Greco-Roman world, they brought with them their own Greek ways of thinking about the body and the soul. And this was heavily influenced by Platonic thinking. When I say Platonic, I'm referring to Plato, the philosopher. Not the Jewish views of Jesus and his followers. The new generation of non-Jewish Christians continued to believe that justice would be done after death, but it would not be a bodily kingdom on earth, it would be a spiritual kingdom in heaven above. And this is how theologians such as Augustine and his views on original sin came into evolution. So let's have a look a little bit at Plato and what his fundamental ideas were surrounding this. So, in the writings of Plato, he wrote the myth of which outlines a soldier whom after he dies descends into the underworld, only to return to warn people that their souls will be judged and either rewarded with eternal bliss or punished with torment, depending on their actions during this life on earth. The souls are judged by divine beings and sent to their respective fates based on the moral quality of their lives. So what is Plato's impact then? Well, while Plato's conception of the afterlife was not identical to later Christian depictions of hell, the core ideas of moral judgment, eternal rewards, and eternal punishments for actions in this life would heavily influence Christian thought in the future. Plato laid the groundwork for the notion of a moral system where justice transcends death and continues into eternity. Augustine, for example, this is where he came up with the notion that hell was a punitive place where God sent people for the retribution of original sin. So what was this philosophical legacy that Plato brought about? Well, he brought about this dualistic view of reality. He brought about the idea of the separation of body and soul. Remember what we said earlier. They originally were merged. We now have two entities, which also fed into the idea of an immortal soul being subject to eternal consequences, whether it be heaven or hell. This separation helped foster a vision of hell as a place where the soul is punished, irrespective of the body's life here on earth. Why does any of this matter? Well, Plato's influence on the development of hell cannot be underestimated. The idea of the afterlife as a place of divine judgment and moral consequence is not uniquely Christian. It stems way back to Greek philosophy, which then was absorbed into early Christian thinking through figures like Augustine. Plato provides the philosophical foundation for thinking about hell not just as a moral consequence, but as an eternal state for the soul. And this is where the game entirely changed. Despite endless research into this topic, why then do these ideas still largely prevail within huge sects of the Christian establishment? This is where we're now going to look at the why. So let's first look at some of the philosophical premises for the existence of hell. Number one is the need for justice. One compelling reason people hold on to the notion of hell is the human desire for justice. Hell, as eternal punishment, provides the ultimate answer to this question. What happens to the wicked? It's the way societies have often dealt with these moral imbalances. If wrongdoing can't be punished in this life, they must be punished in the next. Number 2, the human desire for certainty. You see, hell offers a clear dichotomy. The righteous go to heaven and the wicked go to hell. In a world full of ambiguity and suffering, this simplicity can be very appealing. It gives individuals a sense of control, virtue, morality, and a certainty about life after death. This was also one of the appealing selling points of the church before the deconstruction process. Number 3, fear as a tool. Hell is a good motivator. Throughout history, religious authorities have used the fear of hell as a way to regulate behavior, control populations, and maintain power. The threat of eternal punishment is one of the most effective ways to enforce moral codes, especially when combined with the promise of salvation. The question is, when you get rid of hell, what carrot do you dangle? Or how about the role of tradition? Once a religious or cultural concept becomes deeply ingrained, it's hard to shake off, really hard to shake off. You see, hell has become such a staple of religious identity, particularly in Christianity, that many still hold on to it despite doubts to its validity and its necessity. You see, if we challenge the notion of hell, and this is a tough one, does this then raise the question as to also what we mean by heaven? Correct. Existential anxiety. The idea of heaven and hell offers a sense of ultimate consequence and structure to our lives, especially in a world where we can often feel powerless. So what do we do to challenge some of these concepts? So we have the moral problem. Does an eternal punishment for finite sin make any ethical sense? What if you've lived a perfectly good life, but don't believe the Christian narrative? Are you doomed? These are questions that we need to ask. Or what about the nature of evil? If hell is a place for the wicked, who defines what's wicked? What do we mean by wicked? What do we mean by evil? Who gets to decide this? Religious authorities? Governments? Or how about individuals themselves? This brings us to the question of whether such a system can ever be truly just. How about the question of fear versus free will? Is the fear of hell a healthy motivator for moral behavior, or does it reduce free will to mere compliance? What kind of ethical system is rooted in fear rather than love or personal growth? We then have the problem of divine justice. If hell exists, is it truly just to condemn someone for an eternity based on their choices in a very brief and very short human life? How do we reconcile eternal punishment with the finite nature of the human life and also a loving, forgiving God? Again, questions that, if we care about truth, we have to ask. So as we begin to summarize this before I allow you time to discuss this morning's topic, this is where the challenge really comes. Once you question the very foundations of the history of heaven and hell, but particularly as this morning, hell, and how these concepts evolved after Jesus' death, then what really is the Christian message all about? And even more, are we bothered if there is no guaranteed eternal reward? Hell gives great leverage to an institution if its whole premise is reward for good, punishment for bad. I would argue that Christianity over time became a message about death and not about life, in the here and now, in this physical body. You see, Jesus' message was basically this: follow me and I will make you. It was the perfect expression of pioneers versus settlers. The message spoken to the culture of the time cut across their established traditions and shook up the very foundations of their core beliefs. He didn't get people to follow him by threatening them with eternal conscious torment, because that isn't what he actually believed. Many of you will know, and non-religious people alike, have heard of the Beatitudes. Blessed are, blessed are, blessed are. Be this, be that, be this. The whole thing was about what you be. My dad once said, he used to teach about, let's live in tents, not in temples. This whole idea of we're constantly willing to move and shift with the times and evolve what we be based on what is required of us in each moment. But you see, temples become static. Over time, creeds were formed, a set of beliefs that became sacred, stagnant, and immovable. Rob Bell referred to this as brickianity. And you see, static beliefs create institutionalization. What we be is an expression of the kingdom in the here and now. It is the culture that is alive and breathing, not concerned for what's next, but for the experience and life that you are living today. The biblical writers depict the idea that when Jesus breathed his last, the temple curtain was torn in two, only to reveal that there was absolutely nothing behind it. It's one of the most powerful depictions, in my opinion, of that story. It was the purest revelation that you are the temple, that holiness and virtue was not found in structures, but in the life of everyday people like you and me. The conversation surrounding eternal life shifted the focus from heaven on earth to getting somewhere after we die. It went from directional living to destinational living. You see, is life really just about waiting for some future judgment or reward? Or is it about the sound you choose to follow? The most profound experience we can have is right now, because that's all that actually exists. Life isn't about some distant heaven or hell. It's about living fully, boldly, and consciously today. The question that I propose to you this morning is this: will you follow? When you hear that call, not to somewhere out there or out there, but to right here, the pulse in the present, you realize the kingdom is not somewhere that you'll go. It's the life that you're already living right now. It's the awakening of your being in this moment. And that, my friends, is the truest kind of transformation that there is. And so I would like to leave you with these questions for your tables. Number one, did you know that Jesus' concept of hell wasn't the same hell that was eventually taught way after his death? Number two, If the modern doctrine of hell is flawed, can you accept this and move beyond it, or are you forever loyal to it? Number 3, how much does the assurance of an afterlife mean to you? And number 4, if there was no assurance of the afterlife, what would Christianity in the 21st century look like? Some real big questions there for you. I hope that's been interesting for you, and enjoy your chats on your tables. Thank you very much.